Hello everyone, it's me, Logan ISL, and welcome back to the second edition of Bad Tower School. You guys really loved the last one, so for my final video before I go back to school for this year, we'll be making another video for this series of towers.
Hey again everyone, my name's Lightsynth, and welcome to the second episode of Bad Tower School, where we take a look at some of the worst towers currently in the game and analyze them from bottom to top, and show you guys how to avoid the mistakes they made. Today's tower will be one that had a very close competition for the polls that were hosted during the premiere of the pilot episode. The results were almost split right between the middle of what you all wanted to see next, but one tower barely managed to top over the other in the end. So stick around with us in World 1, as we're going to be diving a little deeper into the Inferno this time and heading straight into Ring 4, also known as Greed, where our main discussion for today will be located. If you're aware of the polls from last episode, you'll know exactly what tower we'll be talking about for this episode. So, without further ado, let's head into the Tower of Linonophobia.
The story for this tower's insertion is interesting to say the least. It was a tower made by Cielozolski back in around September of 2018 during the Kato era, who at the time was known as Blend Bad Boy 112, a former JTO staff member that was also a developer for the game, who even helped on some of the rings and even towers in the game, even after Obertune left his job for Jukeries to handle. At the time of Ring 4's development, Seal wasn't a staff member or even part of the development team at all. From what we've gathered in how Tower of Linonophobia got into Ring 4, the reason it was picked was because Seal was asking for it to get into the game, to the owner of the game at the time, Obertune, and later went to Jukeries, back then known as Jupiter 5, and asked them to play through it and put the tower into the ring. Jukeries enjoyed it, and that's how it got added to the game. Yes, this supposedly joke of a tower managed to get in, because the co-owner at the time liked it, which was a common reason for how a tower back in the day got added to the game. While this should have been considered a good thing back in the day for any person making a tower, Juke made somewhat of a mistake, as this was at a time when Seal was, let's just say, a bit sensitive to receiving criticism and hate. When Tower of Linonophobia was released alongside Ring 4 as a difficult tower, it was initially somewhat liked, but as time went on, more and more people started to despise this tower's gameplay and concept as a whole, to a point where Seal eventually had a breakdown from all the hate he got later during the game's development, which most certainly had an effect on his view of the JTO community after his departure. And this hate still continues to be piled onto the tower even to this day, with people going as far to call it a joke tower that Seal originally made, when it actually isn't. Trust us, it's best that we just leave it at that, as we really don't want to dig up the can of worms regarding drama in the past. Eventually, the tower was bumped down from the difficult difficulty to a high to peak hard difficulty, but this still remains contested if it should remain in the hard or difficult difficulty. But the most important question that has to be answered in today's video is, why was this tower even hated in the first place? And what really soured people's opinions on it these following years later? Well, let's find out. The stage is yours, Lightsynth. Take it away.
Gee, this song sure likes to play on a lot of early Kato era towers during the first few floors, doesn't it? Anyways, to start off with this tower, this floor isn't anything too special. Its gameplay can be summarized as walking over thick tight ropes, some walking simulators, and some basic jumps and platforming that has no variety to it. And that's about it. I don't have anything else to comment on, except for how sleep-inducing this floor is compared to the rest of the tower in terms of its difficulty. It's literally just easy difficulty gameplay from start to finish if you think about how the gameplay is presented here, due to how extra thick these tight ropes are. Really, the only interesting thing that is worth pointing out is that this is where you start and end the tower, as you can see the wind pad right on the other side parallel to you. We'll get into that shiny glowing pad a little later, as we're just getting started with this tower.
Considering even today Seal can get a little sensitive towards criticism, I am rather interested to see how this video ends out. But as always, this series is meant to be educational, and you guys wanted us to trash the fuck out of this tower, so let's go ahead and get started. I gotta say, Lightsynth, this song is pretty nostalgic, man. Floor 1 is very short and very simple. However, I do want to go ahead and give Seal some credit here. A lot of towers from Kaito didn't have much angling in their gameplay at all. Pretty much what I'm saying is that the towers back then apparently understood that they could move their gameplay 45 or 90 degrees. So the tower kind of feels like a square rather than moving all the way around and using the entire frame. But it seems that Seal actually knows his shit. Don't understand what I mean? For example, take a look at some footage of Tower of Holy Flip. Notice how it simply turns sometimes and most of the time only like 90 degrees to a different direction? That's what I mean. Take a look at these two towers. Which one from the look of the eye do you think had more effort put into it? Now, yes, the tight ropes are the cause for the gameplay to move around, but I still want to point this out. I feel like towers that only move around in increments of 45 or 90 degrees feel rather empty and boring. Towers that kind of move around like a free-for-all always feel like they have more effort to me, and more thought in their gameplay. Granted, it is definitely the only tight ropes that move around, but considering this was the Kaito era, I feel like one reason why this tower had a unique identity compared to other towers in Kaito was the fact that this tower just simply felt different. However, the gameplay itself is definitely not the best. It's just basic studs and tight ropes, and that's it. Nothing really special at all. A lot of the time, the platforms just stay the same size until a different tightrope appears. And this is where I want to point out something I've noticed as a player over the years. A lot of people building towers have a lot of struggle dealing with floor 1. And personally, from my point of view, and I don't know about Lightsynth here, floor 1 is the hardest floor to make in a Jato tower. No question about it. Starting on a tower is just insanely difficult, and 99% of Jato towers have a shorter floor 1 with nothing too special about them. The only tower to mine that has a jam-packed and blazing floor 1 is astronomically aimless annoyances. So don't be afraid if floor 1 isn't very good. You can always come back and tweak it later once your tower has a little more identity and you have a better idea of what your tower is actually like.
This floor starts off with a kill brick maze that's, yet again, really nothing too special. Following that, you got some more basic jumps and tight ropes that feel like walking more than actual platforming. Yeah. For the more astute viewers, you can already see what the main recurring problem for this tower is going to be, since it just spams basic jump after basic jump alongside tight ropes that barely add anything to its gameplay. The only thing that is mildly interesting is the kill brick maze near the start, which feels unfortunately too underdeveloped and short-lived in its execution. And it just ends up coming off as forgettable compared to everything else in the tower.
Wait, Lightsynth, did you say a kill brick maze?
Yeah, what about it?
This is revolutionary! All jokes aside, this floor is literally just an extension of floor 1, but with a different color. If you connected these two floors together and had them have the same color, no one would question your decision to go ahead and do that. The only thing that really stands out for this floor is the kill brick maze. Hell, even my grandma could come up with the idea to add a kill brick maze to spice things up. At the end of this floor is finally the first part where you stop holding your spacebar. Be honest, everyone holds the jump button down while doing the beginning of Linonophobia. I mean, even Alert is doing it. The ending features a very simple staircase, because Seal clearly just decided to end his work session. Transitions into floors are very important in my opinion, because it can make the tower seem very messy, and just adding an elevator up, or in this case putting a few studs in a formation upwards, seems very lazy and rather garbage. Don't tense yourself up just because there's a new floor coming. Just pretend it really isn't there and the tower will feel more clean to me. I can't tell you how many Atos towers I've played where they clearly care too much about the next floor coming.
More basic jumps at the start. What more do I need to say? Anyways, here's our first spike of the tower. This head hitter jump before the first outside section. It is easily manageable compared to the other spikes throughout the tower, so it's not that big of a deal. After that, do some more walking and basic jumps until you reach the outside section, which really doesn't pose much of a threat. One thing on this floor that is a mild annoyance though is the transparent parts during this outside part. But as I said, it's just a mild annoyance at worst since it harmlessly tricks the player into thinking it's a Kank-like false part when it really isn't. or in layman's terms, it's a part you can just stand on without falling through. Anyways, the rest of the floor after that is just more basic, boring, and bland jumps. My fucking god. However, it does throw in some wedges that are slightly interesting, I guess.
After what usually takes around 1 minute of pain and agony, we finally reach floor 2 of the tower.
Wait, isn't this floor 3, Logan? What the hell?
Floor 1 and 2 are the same. The head hitter at the start is the exact feeling you get when you're having a deep sleep and your mom wakes you up for school. Because if you're dozing off, this jump is what wakes you up. Honestly, this is definitely a sign that Seal didn't do a good job of testing his tower here. I swear that he basically made a section of the tower, went, yep, okay, that's good, and just never came back to it again. On the outside, you can tell that Seal was definitely trying to make the tower a little different again. How so? Transparent platforms. Where have I not seen this before? Another great example of a lack of testing here is a very easy to see skip that even a mega fun obby player would go ahead and take. Wait, are those wedges? No way! This tower's getting really creative here, guys! I gotta say though, this very short section where the tower starts to switch up its gameplay is actually a decent section for a Kaito era tower, and actually doesn't have you going.
Well then, while Logan is sleeping, thank God, I'll take over from this next part. This floor is... well, you get the point. It's boring as standing and watching grass grow around you. If you couldn't already tell by now, since much like the rest of this tower's first 4 floors that made Logan fall asleep. You can get a fucking energy drink before deciding to do this with me. Anyways, you start off with some kill bricks that are forced onto the player, but aren't too bad, followed by your usual tower Linonophobia gameplay. Basic jumps and thick tight ropes. This isn't repetitive at all. Though, compared to some of the first 3 floors, this is probably where the tight ropes start to get a little bit thin. To a point where a newer player in this ring might have to zoom their camera into first person to deal with them. For people like me and Logan though, this is more than manageable to do in third person, and just makes this feel like yet another floor that's complete filler to go through. The killbrick wall after the killbrick wraparound though is where the first somewhat major annoyance comes in. If you aren't facing your character towards the ball, you're going to be taking a lot of damage and be forced to heal up a little bit before continuing to the next floor by doing some more basic land hydro gameplay. Yay! Alongside some mediocre jumps in terms of enjoyment. All this really does is drag down the pacing of the tower for me, in all honesty, though I can stomach this somewhat. Is he still asleep? Are you awake yet, Logan? Do I need to stop your throat with caffeine pills to keep you awake?
It's another day of school. It's actually quite interesting to see creators' very first towers put in JTO, because you can see them slowly improve, and this floor is definitely a great part of what I mean. Yes, this tower is boring as platforms and tight ropes, but this time, Seal actually goes ahead and spices it up more. This time, there are kill bricks on the platforms. Oh, and look, it's a wall that's a massive kill brick. Even though this is a very minor change, it definitely at least shows that Seal was at least trying, and that I can commend him for. But unfortunately, this floor is more boring than watching golf.
Finally, a slightly interesting floor to talk about. This honestly isn't that bad for Ring 4 standards, but it's still a rather mediocre floor, since it suffers from the same problems that floors 1 to 4 have that me and Logan have already explained in well enough detail for you all to understand. It starts off by introducing jumping from one tightrope to another, followed by doing these very simple killbrick spinners. Do another tightrope jump here, followed by some wraparounds, and yeah. I got nothing more to say since the variation here is the equivalent to chomping down a bland, tasteless pasta and meat sauce. The rest of the floor from this point onward is jumping on killbrick platforms, followed by jumping over the killbrick spinners on these 2x2 platforms that you can just treat as walking simulators leading to the next floor. While this is still not a good floor by any means, it's a tiny bit better than what the first 4 floors have going for them in terms of their gameplay, so that's a plus in my book for this tower at least, right?
I agree with Light here. For Ring 4 standards, this floor is actually pretty good. It's an upgrade in quality for sure, but that's really all I can say about it. Len definitely introduced himself to the kit for this one, and actually started spicing up the gameplay a little bit more, like, oh, right, you get the point. This tower barely has anything to spice it up with at all.
This floor is basically floor 5, except it's purple, and the tightropes are slightly thinner. Oh yeah, there's also this tightrope jump at this point here that is somewhat of a spike around halfway through the floor, and the song's a little different.
Next!
Like floor 5, floor 7 starts off with some rather simple spinners before transitioning to a walking plus jumping simulator thanks to the 2x2 path leading to the Killbrick maze. Oh brother, this maze. The maze on this floor is slightly less annoying than the Killbrick maze in Tower of Overcoming Hatred, that's for sure, but it's still complete trash as it is in its gameplay, because no matter how you approach it, it almost always feels like you're just going to land on the Killbrick floor below the 1-stud platforms, and eventually be forced to heal up because of how small the platforms are, coupled with the maze being really cramped and claustrophobic to navigate through. Plus, your character's feet sink into the platforms like this, which is enough to cause the game to register you as touching the Killbrick floor. Which leads to more damage. Which leads to more healing. Nice. It's the first actual frustrating and annoying thing to point out in this tower that can slow down the pacing of the tower as a whole. After that, you have some more tightropes, and it should come to everyone's attention at this point that even some of the more experienced players will be compelled to go into first-person mode due to how thin the ropes are starting to get. This also has the unintended side effect of making a jump from one tightrope to another just downright brutal sometimes, especially for a player that's just recently made it to Ring 4 straight from Ring 3, who most likely lacks the proper experience or knowledge with tightrope-based gameplay such as this. There's also this very boring and basic 1x1 path with a Killbrick spinner that you have to avoid and jump over, but honestly at this point, this should be something extremely easy for you to get through compared to what's coming ahead of you. Trust me, from this point on, the tower's difficulties, fluctuations, starts to get bad. Oh my god!
It's definitely rather refreshing that this floor doesn't have a ton of tight ropes and spinners. But in a compromise to having the Killbrick maze, I will pass, thank you very much. Honestly, I can't blame you if you just go ahead and take the damage, then sit for 10 minutes trying to heal. Hope your server has Killbrick lag. Fortunately, there is some smelly cheese in this section afterward though. You can jump up here, then head down to the 1x1 spam. Or if you're 15-year-old cheddar cheese, you can wall hop this to skip some tight ropes. Oh, and yeah, can you guess what the rest of the floor is like? Tight ropes and basic platforms! A big shocker, I know.
You see what I mean when the difficulty started to get bad when I mentioned it in floor 7? The tightrope jumps on this floor start to ask a lot out of the player, especially for a tower that's meant to be peak hard difficulty. The parts that aren't focused on tightropes, such as the 1x1 paths, when compared to the actual tightrope gameplay, is easy and always feels like a jarring drop in its difficulty. Really, the rest of the floor is just the same gameplay that you've already seen the past 7 floors of this tower, except it's slightly harder and it's not going to stop. Oh, no. However, one positive thing I will say about this floor is the music. It's good. It sets the tone for how hard the last floors will be, but it feels completely squandered and short-lived in where it's located due to how long you'll be staying on this floor, which is quite short-lived. Such a shame, man. Ugh.
Really, Lightsynth? The music? Every Geometry Dash player is laughing at you right now.
Hey, shut up!
That aside, however, when I personally played this tower, this was the floor where it actually started. Why? Because here comes the difficulty. This floor's tight ropes are especially thin, which wouldn't be too bad until you had to start doing jumps and turns on them. This floor is especially easy to have your legs split and swing your nuts off the tightrope and down you let it go. This floor honestly just feels like the rest of the tower with thinner Excuse me, what the f was that? Don't tell me that's oh my god, you're serious, right? Great job on your bug testing, Seal, because this tightrope makes the intended route suicide, so you have to do a skip. This is something that I've seen many people fall for, and it's just nothing short of just pure ignorance. Ugh, let's get to the next floor, Lightsynth.
This floor starts off rather innocently, until you make it to the tightrope you have to scale along the wall. Seriously, what in the actual hell is this? Even Logan, someone who has beaten soul-crushing towers, had trouble on this part in his beginner's guide video while trying to beat this tower, and he even called this part inconsistent himself! I'm also pretty sure that many others whom have gotten this far into the tower will call this inconsistent too, especially for first-time players trying to beat this! For me, there is a consistent strategy to doing it, where you have to walk on it while angling your character a little bit to the left or right. Sounds easy, right? Well, yes, on paper, but not for someone that's just gotten to Ring 4, who won't even know how to approach this part without failing multiple times. This one part is just going to be one giant roadblock for new players just because they haven't even properly learned how the tightropes work at this point, especially tightropes like these! This floor, much like some of the tightrope jumps on floor 8, just asks way too much out of the player, and we haven't even gotten past the actual start of it! The tightrope jumps in this floor are also a massive spike from this point onward, no matter who you are. Sure, the tightropes in floor 8 could have potentially been a pain, but the tightropes here, starting from this floor onward, are starting to get thin to a point where this starts to get fucking hellish for mobile players trying to beat this. Seriously, just look at them and compare some of them to Tower of Hex tightropes on floor 10. These are even better than the ones out there. Not to mention that they're generally harder to pull off without getting your nuts teared in half if your legs get split. The outside section on this floor is especially the equivalent to getting your balls whipped like that one scene in Casino Royale. Especially if you already lost them by getting your legs split between the tightropes, considering that at this point, the tower starts to become either difficult or even challenging gameplay for some people, including myself! And on top of the simple fact that if you fall even once on the backside of the frame during the outside, your run at that point is pretty much over. This is just abominable to a point where I question if the tower at this point was either trying to be difficult or challenging when it was originally submitted. The part after that hell? Jarringly easy. Like, seriously? I guess this is meant to be a cooldown of some sort? But it could have been handled so much better instead of being a literal cakewalk to the final four. It just feels insulting. Seriously, out of all the floors so far, this has to be the most punishing one, on top of having the worst difficulty fluctuations that I've ever seen!
I will admit that in my beginner's guide video, I did forget that you're supposed to angle yourself when you jump onto it, but still, this is a peak hard tower, and especially in a beginner ring, it's just stupid to put a pretty complicated strategy, especially when you're on floor 9 for God's sake. This outside section is just f***ing brutal and a sin. There is no reason whatsoever that there should be tightropes this thin on a hard tower in the first place, let alone on an outside on floor 9 while having to jump in between them. Whenever I play this tower, it is almost inevitable that this part decides to give me a not-so-kind hello. But when you come back inside, it's like Seal realized that he actually f***ed up, as it's just this boring transition up to floor 10. Which, speaking of the devil...
Well, Logan and viewers, here we are. After that hell that was floor 9, it's time for the final floor. And yes, this is the one floor where mobile players might as well just quit the tower and toss any chance of winning it out the window while they're at it and rethink their next hard difficulty tower to do, or even jump straight to their first difficult, because the tightropes at this point get outrageously thin! Seriously, this makes floor 9's difficulty in terms of fluctuations as a whole look tame in comparison to this. It makes this an absolute nightmare for mobile players to beat. it doesn't start off too bad. But once you get past the first 2 tightropes, just... They're... God! Look! At this! Look! 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 It's as if you took floor 10 of Tower Rage's tightrope maze with a god-awful gameplay that had to stopper, but removed the cylinder platforms that allow you to take a braver on them, as well as made the tightrope somehow even thinner! This pretty much means that your only source of braving room in this entire section of the floor are the thin-ass tightropes that you're standing on, which can easily push you off them if you even move your cursor off of them in the slightest! Even as someone who has been a high-to-peak insane as their hardest tower currently in the game, this part still gets me a few times because of how stupidly thin the tightropes are, on top of having to play what is basically a harder version of the scary maze game's last stretch before the jump scare, except the jump scare at this floor is you falling! Okay, but once you manage to do that, yeah, this tower is still not over, as you have a dropper made up of killbrick floors to go through. Similar to Tower of Confusion Side B, except so much easier and far less interesting in its gameplay. And finally, to top it all off, you have a transparent tightrope on floor 1 that you have to walk across from a small platform without being able to pivot yourself at a straight 90-degree angle to get to the wind path, since it's angled by a few degrees. Falling once here means you redo the whole f***ing tower all over again. Seriously, this final part is just flat out unnecessary. At best, it's really easy if you know what you're doing and aren't stressed out. At worst, it's just f***ing evil. Especially if you're a new player making it here for the first time and end up losing literally all of your progress because you couldn't see where the platform you had to land on was. I'm so f***ing done.
Jesus fucking Christ. These tightropes up here that are thinner than an Asian person. Considering Tower of Rage Floor 10 is one of the harder parts in a challenging tower, then this comes in and makes it harder? What the absolute is this? With the very wonky way Roblox physics are, it is so easy just to simply have your legs split and lose all your control. Considering this is right after floor 9, I am really sorry for all the new players to have to deal with this shit. Plus, the dropper, what was even the point of splitting the tower in half for like 15 seconds of gameplay on the other side? This part just feels wonky because it's just so massive for what it needs to be. Also, about the part how the final tightrope is just so conveniently to not even be at an even angle, so you have to slowly traverse it as the perfect icing on top to finish this dog shit of a tower. Oh, and if you mess up, whoops, back to floor 1. I'm about done with this tower shitty gameplay. Oh my god, let's go ahead and talk about this tower's design. I'm out of here. Wait, Lightsynth, you okay? Oh god, they're unconscious and bleeding from their throat. Can we get a medic in here?
Okay, feeling a little bit better now. Let's go ahead and talk about this tower's design. It has nothing special going for it. It's just a generic ass looking tower with generic looking platforms with no variety to it at all. It occasionally has some boring killbrick spinners, as well as tightrope spam that doesn't even look visually appealing due to how the tower looks from the outside. The tightropes especially are a bit of a problem, considering that some tightropes transition from one floor to the next in terms of color, and the sudden color change is just jarring and unappealing. Plus, some tightropes tend to cut off mid-air throughout the tower, especially on floor 10, where this is abundantly evident if you ghost yourself with a camera. Another thing that bothers me is that there are 0 particles that emit from the killbricks throughout the tower. This carries over to some of the other towers Seal has made under his bland Bad Boy 112 moniker, such as Tower Glitching and Healing, and it just comes off as an odd design choice more than anything that is jarring compared to some of the other towers in certain rings. And finally, let's talk about the song choices throughout the tower. They're not bad by any means, especially for this tower's standards back in the day. But they're just really uninspired considering that most of them have already been used in other towers prior to it being released, alongside everything else in Ring 4 such as Better Off Alone on floor 1, Mumbo's Mountain on floor 2, Frisisi Peak on floor 3, as well as Gruntilda's Lair. Everything else is just forgettable aside from floors 8, 9, and 10, which have some really good songs to complement their overall difficulty of the floors. But floor 10 has also been used before in Stone's classic version made by Ice and Salt on, well, its final floor. It's not bad by any means, it's just unoriginal. Really, that's the whole story with this tower's design. There's nothing special in it, and it just makes this tower feel even more forgettable, boring, and bland than it already is.
Personally, I don't have any problems with the design really at all. Unlike Tower Traps, where the colors and stuff makes it feel messy and has very questionable choices all the way around, I find TOL's design to be alright. Yes, it's very simple and nothing special, but at least it doesn't feel cluttered or anything. Plus, the entire section of the frame was used, and there really isn't any areas that were neglected at all. When it comes to recycled music, this is something I really don't care about as a person. Why should I lose my shit over hearing the same song again? I think it's funny every time the world revolving shows up in a tower, because of the sole reason that everybody is losing their marbles. Compared to other towers in Ring 4, I think this design is in the middle of the road and alright. I feel like it's nothing special, but nothing bad either.
So here's what we got. The Tower of Linonophobia is a peak hard tower that spans a lot of tightropes and a ton of basic generic jumps and small walking simulators that starts off incredibly easy during the first few floors, then finally caps off at borderline challenging difficulty for the final floors, where the tightropes get way too thin to a point where it becomes literally soul-crushing for mobile players, and it's still a giant cliff of a spike for many people that use computers, even for veteran players. The design as a whole is really boring and extremely generic with what it has to offer, beside it being alright for its standards, alongside having some odd design choices, whilst also having some uninspired and recycled song choices, which again don't really matter all that much. And finally, to seal this tower's fate in the series, why did you think this tower was fun in the first place, Duke Reese? Without out of the way, let's go through the pros and cons of this tower that me and Logan have put together. The routing was fine, aside from floor 10's tightrope maze part. There were no instances of sea fighting. The colors for the tower are okay. There was nothing bugged or broken, aside from a few unintended skips and shortcuts. The tower is in luck-based for PC players, but feels extremely inconsistent for mobile players on the later floors, especially on floor 10. The difficulty feels horribly inconsistent, especially when comparing the tightrope gameplay and regular platforming. The gameplay throughout the tower is extremely repetitive and boring, since it just spams basic jumps and tightrope gameplay. The design is horribly uninspired and really generic and has some problems involved. Most of the songs are recycled from other towers in the game, and or are forgettable. And finally, the tower is poorly playtested. Jesus Christ! Honestly, when your tower has barely any major upsides compared to it having a ton of major downsides, that's where the tower starts to go tits up for most people, and why this even warranted an episode on this series in the first place. It's a shame too, because I see this tower having solid potential in some places, but all these set pieces and ideas just feel totally squandered in their execution when it comes to the actual gameplay, since it's just so lacking in practically everything. And again, there's not much for me to say in regards to this tower anymore, because I'm just going to end up sounding like a broken record compared to the Tower Traps episode, where there was always something new that ended up pissing me off, or made me comment on something that was horrible. Not the case here, since the tower is just repetitive from the word go. This isn't a horrible tower by any means, gameplay-wise. The problem here is that it feels like it's too much of a blank canvas in way too many areas, which makes playing this tower extremely boring as a whole, whilst also having problems just make it exponentially worse to play through the higher up you go, such as on the last 4 floors.
This tower is a great example as to why I believe the curators and staff, when bug testing new areas or picking towers for future rings and zones, should put their no-clip away. It's so obvious which towers they just play through when they are in the completely wrong spot on the difficulty chart, or they're just so inconsistent that it ruins the tower. If there was a genuine effort put into trying to beat this before putting it in, the choice would have likely been reconsidered. However, when the stick could first get in, it was seen as alright. From my understanding, it was when mobile players became decently popular in Johto that this tower started to go ahead and get a very negative view by the community. The tower's balancing is one of the reasons why as well that this tower is just simply ruined in my opinion. The tower's balancing is one of the reasons why I think this tower is just simply ruined in my opinion. If the tower's difficulty was consistent, I don't think this tower would see a lot of the hate it has today. For sure. This tower is just simply repetitive and nothing else as well, considering there are very hard parts at the end. This just simply makes the tower feel like a Thanos tower for noobs. Overall, I do think Juke made a good decision to put this in the game, however. As for the other towers in the lineup for Ring 4 at the time, it could have been way worse. This was a tower that simply just didn't age well at all, just like Tower of Traps. It was seen as fine, but when age came along, it just got self-ruined.
Anyways, let's hopefully come up with some ways of fixing those problems and try to be as creative as possible with what I can imagine in a revamp for this. Because this might be a bit of a doozy that might make this tower completely different from what it currently is. I have more than a few ideas in my head that might save this tower from getting an episode, so let's cover them in detail. We can first and foremost focus on making the client object-based gameplay of this tower much more varied than it currently is. How this can be done is by adding mechanics related to anything that's related to ropes. After all, the word Linonophobia means the fear of strings in Latin, which also includes anything that has to do with ropes. So, going by the logic of what the definition of Linonophobia means, we can also add client objects or mechanics related to rope or spring swinging platforms, not just tight ropes. The whole tower itself just being based around tight ropes in the first place, it really just handicaps this tower and what it can do with its variety when it comes to the actual gameplay. It could definitely involve something with welding parts together with ropes and attachments, and maybe even combine both tightrope and rope hanging platform gameplay that could potentially create something crazy and interesting that will keep the player interested. Even the underdeveloped mechanics for the tower could be expanded upon greatly in this hypothetical revamp to a far more significant and important role than what they currently have to showcase. Next, I'd like to see the purist gameplay get a very significant revamp in its gameplay. One of this tower's biggest weaknesses right now is that it just spams the same basic repetitive jumps over and over again with no variation. And I'd like to see it have more going for it, even for a hard difficulty tower that you'd fight in something like Forgotten Bridge towers or steeples. Remove the walking simulators and replace them with something else, like jumping over tight ropes for example, alongside varying up the more repetitions parts throughout the tower. Rebalance the difficulty so that both the regular platform gameplay and tightrope gameplay are on the same level in terms of difficulty. The contrast between the two right now is like night and day, as the regular platform is way too easy, while the tightrope gameplay is either too hard or way too easy in some parts. I'd also like the final floors in particular to be nerfed substantially, such as making the width of the tightropes thicker, while the earlier floors should get a small buff to around medium difficulty, which could include making non-tightrope gameplay harder. Make the tower as a whole more friendly towards mobile players, especially in the final floors, either by increasing the width of the tightropes or forcing mobile players to use the pivoting keys, which are the punctuation and comma keys that allow their character to rotate by 45 degrees. The design might not matter much for Johto-era towers, but in this tower I think it could look much nicer than what it currently is like by using more shape variety, as well as getting all of the kill bricks particle emitters, while also fixing up tightropes cutting off before they reach their designated platforms or their tightropes. Find different and more original song choices throughout the tower. This should be self-explanatory. It helps give the tower a proper identity for itself. I'd like it to keep floors 8, 9, and 10 songs, since those are still good enough for a revamp if it keeps the hardest floors feeling. And finally, revamp floor 10 as a whole. Remove the tightrope maze gameplay and have it be some kind of final stretch or exam instead that tests you of everything that you've done throughout the tower. You can keep the dropper as it is, or include a final test or exam within the dropper that keeps the players on their toes. And there you have it, a version of Linonophobia that should be much better in terms of quality, as well as have more varied and interesting gameplay than its current version in Ring 4. All of these fixes and changes would definitely bring up the tower for many people, including myself who kind of wants a revamp for it to happen, even if it meant it could go to challenging difficulty. And even if all of them aren't implemented, having some of them will definitely help this tower be more fondly remembered than what it's like now. Do you have any ideas for what the revamp or tweaked version could be like, Logan, and would you like to see one?
For me, I have the same scuffles as Lightsynth, and I have really nothing else to add. But there is one simple thing for me that is the downfall for this tower, in my opinion, to ever see a fix in J-To. The whole fact that this tower's difficulty is hard just ruins the tower. I can think of many cool ideas I could do for tightropes, but it's practically impossible to do any of them because they suit harder difficulties. It's almost impossible to get a good variety in tightropes at an easier difficulty without it feeling boring. Hence, this is a rare time where I say to actually not revamp the tower. Any attempt at revamping the tower I feel like is of no use at all. This tower is a perfect example of how one simple choice can cause failure. Personally as well, I think this tower is insanely useful for newer players. Yes, it sucks a lot, but with how often tightropes show up, it's nice to have a tower that focuses on them and gives people very good practice, even if mobile players aren't so lucky with it. Back in 2019, when I was trying to transition into a non-coil player, I did feel a huge skill boost from this tower, as I was able to do thinner studs in tightropes much faster, which is a very common obstacle that you see in older towers, which can be very useful way later in the game for towers like Tower of Confusion. Even if this tower got a refresh that made it challenging or so, it may close a hole in Ring 4, because there are no challenging towers other than Wabat. It's not viable, because what about the people who complete the tower already? They would need to do something like Toso badge transfers, which, by the way, hasn't occurred yet, to prevent people from getting a free challenging point for future rings. This is one of those towers that, yes, it may suck, but it's kind of important to not touch it. Plus, as always, I am always apprehensive of touching older towers due to culture shock for new players anyway. To spice up the tightrope gameplay here, we'll call for some very modern ideas, which are going to seem insanely out of place in Ring 4. A revamp isn't what this tower needs. It's a rebalance. The reason why this tower is so boring is because you fall at the top and restart over and over and over and over again. So why don't we just go ahead and fix that? Plus, since this community is getting really pissed at towers getting revamped, even though only one of them was fully revamped and 2 more were updated, with hopefully a 3rd updated tower on the way soon, this community would come at me in Lightsynth with pitchforks if this tower was revamped, which personally annoys me. Why do you guys lose your shit over towers getting revamped? Revamps I can understand, but updates? Seriously? Okay, yeah, Thanos Tower have a reason to be, but like Tosh getting updated with a revamped Floor 8 and a bunch of other changes is really got me stumbled. Either way, I am not the one who makes the decisions here. People like to blame me when stuff changed in Tower of Traps when I had no say in that. Lightsynth is a developer, and that's his decision. So if Tower of Linonophobia gets a revamp, then yeah, I will be annoyed, but I will respect his decision. Be grateful that the game is trying to be more fun rather than tedious, especially if you're a mobile player and you have to deal with this shit.
This is definitely a bad tower in its current form, without a doubt. However, despite having aged like milk under your fridge, it's by no means a horrible tower. Far from it. I do think that despite its questionable quality and overall shortcomings, you should at least still try to beat this tower, since it can provide a good way of controlling your character while walking on tightropes, especially on the later floors where it tests you of this to a big degree. It's at the very least a tower that can teach you something compared to, let's say, the Tower of Traps, where that was just memory-based trial and error gameplay before its update. There is, at the end of the day, something you can learn from this tower. And while this tower is bad, it's mainly because of different reasons, despite sharing some of the same issues the Tower of Traps has, before its update of course. Hopefully, with you knowing better on how to approach tightrope-based gameplay and what this tower has to offer, you should be able to beat this without much of a problem now if you have enough practice under your belt. But for now, go out there and build a tower based off lines, tightropes, and whatever you can find related to anything that's rope-based gameplay. Find someone that you know that will piss their pants at the sight of tightropes or jump ropes, like they're at the end of the world or something, and tell them that bad tower school taught you everything you need to know.
I think the biggest lesson that this tower has is for the curators. For the love of f***ing God, I'm going to be honest and say I am rather annoyed that I have to say this again. But gameplay is much more important than creativity and design. I don't care if the tower looks like Cyberpunk 2077 and it has a V7-like kit. If the gameplay is garbage, the tower is garbage too. I don't care if the tower looks like a GAT tower. If it's insanely fun, then it's a good tower. I've never heard anyone say that Tower of True Skill is a bad tower because it has no design and it isn't that creative. Most people I hear say that Tower of True Skill is a good tower because it's fun. And look, is it anything insanely creative or unique like Tobat? No, it doesn't matter. It's very obvious as well when the curation team either doesn't play through the towers without no clip, because difficulties are just insanely wrong, or towers that are very deceptive to play with no clip get in. No clip is the single most deceptive tool in the game. It hides the fact that towers can be inconsistent and super annoying, and this is something that needs to be accounted for when selecting towers. And I know it sounds funny that I'm saying this, considering when I was worried about Zone 5 being messy, but simple design is fine. I don't have a single problem with toe fact in Ring 9. What do I have a problem with, though, is towers with the complete wrong theme inside of Zone 5. Tower of Linonophobia is a great example of a tower, where if you play it with no clip, it is very easy to get a very incorrect view of the tower and choose to put it in. It can easily not seem that bad, but when you start losing runs all the time on 8 to 10, then all of a sudden, it's a little sucky now. Anyways, for a monthly fee, you can join the channel and get all sorts of cool perks. One of them is getting your name at the end of my videos. You can join by clicking the join button next to the subscribe button or clicking in a link in the description if you're on mobile. There will not be a poll for episode 3, and me and Lightsynth have already chosen the next tower. Thank you all very much for watching, and have a good rest of your day. Class is dismissed. Honestly, I can't blame you if you just go ahead and take the damage, then sit for 10 minutes trying to heal. Just hope you're silver. You're silver. Yes, I see.